We'll reconvene the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Our work this afternoon focuses on social services and the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation. Thank you so very much to Deputy Minister Kirkland and all the officials that have joined us here today, and all those that have been a part of the work that comes together here in these recommendations. At this point, I would ask Deputy Minister Kirkland to introduce briefly just the officials that she wants to introduce at this time. Might be everyone, might be just a few of you. And then we'll turn it over to the auditor to present on the first two chapters combined, and we'll deal with those chapters and subsequent ones following that. So I'll turn it over to Deputy Minister Kirkland for introductions.
Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I introduce my officials, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the work of the Provincial Auditor and to thank her and her team for their advice and recommendations. We're happy to be here to provide updates on the status of each of the new or partially implemented recommendations. I'll be responding to your questions today at a high level, and my officials with me today can fill in the details as requested. So I will introduce the whole team now, and we'll be done with that. Thank you. So to my right, Lynn Allen, Assistant Deputy Minister, Finance and Corporate Services. With Lynn today is Raymond Arscott, our Executive Director of Finance, and Leanne Forgy, Acting Executive Director of Program Support. To my left, Natalie Huber, Assistant Deputy Minister, Child and Family Programs. With Natalie, we have Joel Kilbride, Executive Director of Program Service and Design, and Toby Eberhardt, Executive Director of Community Services. Raynell Wilson is with us, the President of Saskatchewan Housing Corporation and the Assistant Deputy Minister for Disability Programs. Shelley Redekop, Executive Director, Program and Service Design, with Raynell, as well as Bob Martinek, our Executive Director of Community Living Service Delivery. For Housing, we have Diane Baird, our Executive Director. In Income Assistance, we have Tracy Smith, Assistant Deputy Minister. With her, Jeff Redekop, Executive Director of Service Delivery. And also with us today, Natasha Sebastian, my Executive Assistant. So again, thank you for the opportunity today.
Well, thank you so much, and welcome to all the officials that are here. At this time, I'll table PAC 9128, Ministry of Social Services Status Update dated September 26th, 2019. And thank you to everyone that was involved in putting together that status update. It's really helpful for the committee. At this point, I'll turn it over to our Provincial Auditor and her office to focus on chapters 32 and 39.
Thank you very much, Chair, Deputy Chair, members, and officials. What I'm going to do is just take a moment to show, just to explain how we're going to navigate through the 9 chapters that are on the agenda. As the Chair mentioned, we're going to group the first 2 together in one presentation, and then the next one will be a separate presentation. Then the 2017 Report Volume 2, Chapter 17, and the 2018 Report Volume 2, Chapters 17, 16 and 17, those 2 there will be grouped together, and then the rest will be on their own. So we'll be pausing after each presentation to allow for the committee's deliberation. There's 2 chapters that can contain new recommendations for the committee's consideration. That's the 2018 Report Volume 2, Chapter 17, and then the third last chapter, which is the 2018 Report Volume 2, Chapter 26. The remaining chapters, the committee has seen those the recommendations and deliberated on them previously. I do want to take a moment to thank the Deputy Minister and your team for the cooperation extended to our office in the course of our work. We greatly appreciate that. So without further ado, I didn't introduce my team. Ms. Tara Clement. Tara is a deputy that leads the work that's before us this afternoon. And Ms. Kim Lowe, this time around, she's not just the liaison for the committee, but she's led quite a bit of the work that's again on the agenda today too. So she's got 2 hats back there. So Ms. Clement.
So Chapter 32 of our 2017 Report Volume 2 on pages 277 to 279 and Chapter 39 of our 2019 Report Volume 1 on pages 243 or 343 to 346 reports the results of our second and third follow-ups of the recommendations we originally made in our 2013 audit of the ministry's processes to place ministers' wards in permanent homes. As reported in our first follow-up, by March 2015, the ministry had implemented 4 of the 7 recommendations made in our 2013 audit, and it had further work to do on 3. Under the Child and Family Services Act, the ministry is required to intervene on a child's behalf if a child is in need of protection due to physical, sexual, or emotional abuse or neglect. When children have remained in the care of the ministry for more than 18 months, they become permanent wards or long-term wards of the minister based on court orders. On December 31st, 2018, the ministry had 465 permanent wards and 609 long-term wards in their care. As reported in our third follow-up, so Chapter 39 of our 2019 report, by December 2018, the ministry implemented 2 of the remaining 3 recommendations. It had not fully implemented 1 recommendation about placing eligible children on the adoption list within 120 days. By December 2018, the ministry collected and analyzed information to enable it to determine the effectiveness of its services for permanent and long-term wards in its care. Information collected helped to assess the following aspects of services to wards: financial independence, so the ministry strives to support wards to achieve financial independence on adulthood. Permanence, placement stability is very important for wards. Health and safety, the ministry tracks children who have died or been involved in high-impact critical incidents. Successful youth transitions between ministry divisions. And school performance. The ministry receives academic information about wards from the Ministry of Education. As of December 2018, the ministry had not yet met its target to register at least 85% of eligible permanent wards on its adoption registry within 120 days of becoming a ward. Our testing of 10 case files from 2018 found that the ministry registered only 3 of 10 children for adoption within the 120 days. Although the files tested document reasons for the delay in registering the child for adoption. The ministry had begun working to register children for adoption in a timelier way by hiring additional staff to complete child registration packages and prioritizing children under the age of 5 to be registered. Delays in placing children on the adoption registry could negatively affect the likelihood that children find an adoptive home. Placing children on the adoption registry in a timely way increases the chance of them being adopted, as older children are likely less likely to be adopted. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you for the presentation on such an important area. I turn it over to the Deputy Minister for brief remarks, if you care to, and then we'll open it up for questions after that.
So specifically to the recommendation on placing children whose permanency plans include adoption on the adoption list with 120 days. As stated, the provincial auditor has determined this is partially implemented, and the ministry would agree. We continue to work on this recommendation. Besides reviewing the permanent ward adoption policy to date, Social Services has made online training available for prospective adoption applicants so that the completion of home assessments is more timely. We have also created information material for caseworkers. A guide for registration of children and an adoption information sheet will help caseworkers through the process of registering children for adoption and the requirements to complete the necessary paperwork. Remaining actions toward implementation in 2021 include continuing to measure compliance, so previously set standards, by using action plans reviewed by our program effectiveness consultants. This step requires documentation to explain why a child is becoming a permanent ward rather than being placed on the adoption list. A review of the policy as well as staff training will need to be completed before this recommendation is fully implemented. Thank you.
Thanks for the responses. I'll open it up for questions. Ms. Mowat.
Thank you, and I want to thank you for providing the status update as well, and for the officials for being here today. I guess we'll start, I might jump back and forth between the chapters, but I'll start for now within chapter 32. On page 278, So this is where the provincial auditor is noting that between October 1st, 2015 and September 30th, 2016, the ministry placed 50% of the children who became permanent wards on the adoption list within 120 days. I'm wondering if we have data on the proportion of children who were successfully put on that list that are of Indigenous descent, if you have that breakdown.
Thank you for the question. We do not have that data with us today. We could collate it. It would be a manual process, but we could get that data. We do not have it with us.
Thank you. It would be great if it could be provided back to the committee, just so we could get a sense of what the breakdown looks like. And also do you know whether there's a variation in timelines between the south, central, and northern service areas as well?
Thank you. Again, we do not have that information with us, but it is something we can gather for you.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just stop for a moment there. Thank you very much for endeavoring to provide the information you have. We'll have, there's a process with the clerk that he'll provide to get that information back to the committee. So he'll supply that and has the emails and stuff. So thank you.
Thank you. I see that on Chapter 39, when we're looking at the number of permanent wards, on December 31st, 2018, the ministry had 465 permanent wards and 609 long-term wards in its care. Can you provide an update on what that number looked like for 2019, anything that you have presently, as well as 2017, 2016, so just so we can get a sense of a trend?
Thank you. What I do have with me today, specific to your question, is the number of permanent wards as of September 2019 is 460. The other numbers you're requesting are available, just not with us today.
Okay, and I think that the provincial auditor is telling me that the previous one is on the previous chapter as well. So we can draw that together. Sorry, what did you say the 2019 number was?
60.
460, okay. Thank you. In terms of the staff complements in each service area, do you have a breakdown of what the FTEs look like for folks who are providing these services?
Thank you. Sorry for that delay. I'm being told that the way we've utilized our resources, it's a cohort of a number of our different program areas that assist with this work. So what we will have to do is do a breakdown of our overall staff that are specifically dedicated to doing some of this work.
Thank you. Can you also provide any note of vacancies at the same time? Thank
Certainly.
you. So we know that there's been an increased focus on increasing the adoption rates. Has there been a corresponding funding increase or allocation of resources for agencies that provide these services?
Thank you. What I can share at this time is we provide funding to the Adoption Support Center to provide training and support to prospective families, adoptive families. I don't have the amount broken out of our CBOs for that right now, but we can also provide that. And just to clarify that, so they provide training and support, but the adoption registries themselves are done 100% within the ministry.
In terms of, and maybe this is a question for the auditor, in terms of, we know that Indigenous leaders have been quite vocal regarding their concerns about the ministry's processes, about adopting Indigenous youth in care. And we're just wondering if they were consulted in this audit process.
I'm indicating, I'm hearing no. We haven't done a direct consultation with those types of groups in this process. So for this particular work that we're doing, really what we're looking was for an adherence to the ministry's policy and the target, and in terms of how are they doing with respect to that. So so the activity that we took here was quite focused.
Okay, thank you. On page 39, oh, wait, in chapter 39, page 345, there's an indication that the ministry has hired additional staff. I'm wondering if you can speak to how many staff were hired, in what service areas they're servicing.
So specific to our adoption program, adoption registration, we hired 3 new positions to assist in all 3 regions.
And on page 343, the auditor talks about a target that was set to register at least 85% of eligible permanent wards on the adoption registry within 120 days of becoming a ward. However, as of December 2018, the ministry had not met this target. I'm wondering if you can provide an update on what actions have been taken in this process.
So I would refer back to my opening comments or the actions that we have taken. I can reiterate those if you would like.
Maybe just expand on them a little bit. Thank you. Yeah.
I don't at this time have any additional actions. If there are any of those particular ones that you'd like us to speak more to what they are, but those are the actions that we've been undertaking.
Thank you. Just in terms of the recommendation, so I'm just looking at the recommendation on page 344. Where are we here? That the ministry develop performance measures and targets relating to the adoption program for its permanent wards. So is the established target still at 85% within 120 days?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And how is that going in terms of the ministry's ability to meet the targets?
So our 2018 file review would suggest that the compliance rate for permanent wards registration in 120 days was 23%. Additionally, I would point out that about 50% of permanent wards in the last 3 years have been deregistered, given the ability of the ministry and families to find alternative placements.
Thank you. So in terms of the challenges in achieving the targets, what would you say that those challenges are?
I will ask Toby Eberhardt to respond to that for you.
Hi. So some of the challenges that our staff find with the registration are, first, when a wardship is ordered, there's a 30-day appeal process. So often they're waiting to see whether or not the family is going to put an appeal in prior to starting some of the work around the registration. Another one that's quite often that occurs is First Nations or family might come forward to us during that court process and identify another potential caregiver that's related to the child. So we always want to go back and explore family first. And so that'll put a bit of a delay. That could take anywhere from a couple months up to 6-7 months, depending on criminal record checks. And then some of the other delays might be things around getting the medical information. So if a child might have a medical condition, we might need to get more information from the practitioners around that, and that sometimes can take some time.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll move it along. I see Mr. Weeks has some questions.
Mr. Chair, my question is just statistical in nature. So it's okay if you don't have the answer to this today, just if you could supply it later. My question is about the length of time that a child would be in either long-term care or permanent, and including just children that just go into foster care for an interim basis. My question is, how long before an older child would be adopted? What percentage of children that I'm assuming I think you'd said 5 years old kind of is the cutoff for one definition. Just was how many, you'd mentioned that, younger children and babies, I assume, would be adopted out earlier. So what is the percent of children being adopted after 5 or whatever the number is that you use? And like I say, if you don't have that now, it's fine. Supply it another time, you'd be fine. Thanks.
So we do not have that specific information with us today. We can get it for you. I would say that often with older children, when they are adopted, it's a result of people that know them, either through having previously fostered, that previously fostering is often a situation. And the 5 years was, the 5-year sort of cutoff was in relation to focusing on children 5 and under to get the registrations done earlier to help. So that was that 5-year focus.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? Just thanks again to the Deputy Minister for endeavoring to get different information back here. It's totally understood that some of the questions that might come at the table will be beyond maybe what folks are prepared to have as far as information at this table on a given day. So just getting that back is really helpful. So thank you for that. I'm not seeing any other questions at this time. With respect to chapters 32 and 39. These aren't new recommendations, so I'd welcome a motion to conclude considerations here at this point. Ms. Lambert moves. All agreed? That's carried. So we'll move along now to chapter 33, and I'll turn it over to Tara Clement of the Auditor's Office.
So Chapter 33 of our 2017 report, Volume 1, on pages 281 to 284, reports the results of our second follow-up of the recommendations we originally made in our 2012 audit on the Ministry's process to plan for, contract with, and monitor community-based organizations providing services to intellectually disabled people and their families. Community-based organizations are also commonly referred to as CBOs, so I will call them CBOs through this presentation. Our first follow-up, reported in our 2014 report, found the Ministry had implemented 3 of the 8 recommendations we first made in our 2012 audit. By March 15, 2017, the Ministry had improved its processes to monitor CBOs serving intellectually disabled people and their families. The Ministry had implemented 2 of the remaining 5 recommendations. It established policies to obtain required CBO reports that are not submitted by their due date and analyze serious incident reports. It was making progress towards implementing the remaining 3 recommendations, but the Ministry still needed to establish outcome performance measures and targets to better monitor and evaluate the services CBOs deliver, including outcome performance measures and targets in the agreements with CBOs, would allow the Ministry to better evaluate CBO performance and assess if the services delivered achieve the results the Ministry had intended. Develop and implement policies and procedures for addressing risks identified in CBOs. We found the Ministry had began reviewing its risk assessment process and was starting to update relevant policies. The Ministry expected to complete this review and update its manual in fall of 2017. The lack of formal policies could lead to staff completing inconsistent CBO risk assessments. and follow its established monitoring procedures as outlined in the agreements with CBOs. Ministry staff are required to do certain monitoring of CBOs every 2 years. We found that staff had not done the required monitoring for 29% of the CBOs within the last 2 years. We also found the ministry had not conducted a review of 4 CBOs for over 10 years. Lack of timely monitoring increases the risk that CBOs may not achieve the ministry's objectives. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. I'll turn it over to the Deputy Minister for a brief remark, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. So we received 5 recommendations from the provincial auditor, who notes that 2 have been implemented and that 3 are partially implemented. We consider one of those to be fully implemented as well, and I will speak to that. The 2 remaining will be implemented over the next 3 to 4 years, given their scope. So recommendation 3.1, in relation to establishing program objectives and outcomes performance measures. A number of initiatives are underway to improve the strength and quality of measuring the performance of CBOs contracting with social services. First, a draft outcome framework and draft quality assurance standards will identify activities that support quality service delivery and meeting outcomes. As well, we developed material related to enhancing organizational person-centered outcomes that focus on defining what quality service is. This material will help guide CBOs with improving their own person-centered planning and outcomes. Because of the considerable amount of development work required to complete the quality assurance standards and outcome-based contracting, we have designated this a multi-year project with full implementation anticipated over the next 3 to 5 years. More important, we expect that new ways of approaching business standards and contracting will be a significant change for some of our CBOs, and some length of time will be required to familiarize them with the tools and processes. On recommendation 3.2, to develop and implement policies and procedures for addressing risk. We anticipate that by November 2020, we will have put the necessary policies and procedures in place to address risks noted by CBOs serving individuals with intellectual disabilities. We continue to review the risks related to third-party service contracts. This review includes implementing a framework for assessing, monitoring, preventing, and mitigating these contracts' operational risks. A draft framework is now being tested. As well, the ministry has started annual reviews of the financial analysis used to contract CBOs to ensure accurate and consistent information is provided. Remaining actions include completing the risk management process review and developing a ministry contract management framework containing specific reference to risk assessment timing, monitoring, and management. Recommendation 3.4 in relation to established monitoring procedures as outlined in agreements with CBOs. The ministry considers this recommendation to be implemented. Our Disability Programs branch prioritized basic standard reviews for all agencies, including those that are at high risk. Standard reviews are tracked for completion, and quarterly reports based on the data collected are created and distributed. All agencies are required to submit a report, including whether or not they have had any serious incidents involving clients. Training on abuse prevention is monitored to ensure CBOs are meeting their training requirements. And finally, 3 CBO service coordinator positions have been created that focus on CBO service. These positions provide direct quality assurance support, including reviewing and analyzing outcome reports related to person-centered plans, basic standard reviews, attendance reports, and use of program funding. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Just a reminder to any of the other officials that might take a microphone, the Deputy Minister has been introduced, but anyone else that's going to speak, just to introduce yourself briefly before you enter in. Thanks for all the work in the presentation. I'll open it up for questions. Ms. Mowat.
Thank you, and thank you for the opening comments as well. When we're talking about CBOs and specifically the recommendation around assessing risks, there's a note that the auditors made on page 283 that the ministry hadn't updated the policy manual for CBO accountability since 2011, hadn't developed several key policies, including assessing preliminary risk and risk management that relate to CBO risk assessments. I see that the intent is to have the work completed by November 2020. I'm wondering if there will be additional consideration of changing risk landscape to CBOs in light of the closure of Valley View and some of the CBO client bases may have changed as a result of movement of individuals around the province.
What I can say to that is when we were developing the new homes to accept the Valley View residents, we did RFPs, of course, out into the community, and the majority of service providers are service providers we already were working with. For the new ones, of course, they will, as part of their contract, have the same quality assurance requirements and review and reporting as we have for everyone else. So.
Okay. We've heard some concerns about increased violence in some of these workplaces. I'm wondering if the ministry has heard similar concerns or if that's something that would also be factored into a risk matrix here.
Thank you for the question. So a couple things I'd like to share. The ministry provides funding to our partner SARC to do training on handling violence, interpersonal violence in the group homes. Name of that training is PART. I don't know what it stands for, but I could find that out if you want me to. We also, of course, as we alluded to, have an incident reporting requirement. So when incidents do occur, that is reported back to the ministry so we can watch for, be aware of any themes or gaps. I would say as well, overall, in our homes, we have not noticed any sort of significant increase in violent occurrences. What we do have, of course, are our safety net homes where folks who are in some crisis are placed, and so the nature of that work is often more crisis-oriented, and that can be where more of those incidents occur.
Thank you. On page 284, the auditor noted that the ministry had not conducted the review at 4 CBOs over 10 years. I'm wondering which 4 CBOs these were and whether they've been reviewed since then.
I do not have the names, the specific names of those 4 CBOs with me, but all CBOs have had a review since that finding. So there are no outstanding ones from 10 years. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for the questions and the responses. Any other questions from folks with respect to Chapter 33? Not seeing any. Thanks to the Ministry for the important work and significant work on this front. Certainly, it's valued by all. I would welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 33. Mr. Weeks, all in favor? That's carried. We're going to move along, and I believe the auditors identified that we're going to deal with 16 and 17 together. So I'll turn it over to the auditor's office.
These chapters include the results of our annual integrated audits of the Ministry of Social Services and its 3 special purpose funds for the year ended March 31st, 2017 and March 31st, 2018. Each fund complied with the authorities governing their activities, and their 2016-17 and 2017-18 financial statements are reliable. The ministry complied with authorities governing its activities in its 2017 and 2018 fiscal years. In our 2017 report, we found the ministry followed its established procedures for removing unneeded user access to its computer systems and data promptly. As reported in both chapters, we continue to find that the ministry needs to do more to have proper approval and support for social assistance payments, so only eligible clients receive the correct amount of assistance. In 2016-17, for the files we tested, 63% of them had assistance payments that were not properly approved in accordance with policy. In 2017-18, 61% of the tested files had payments approved that were not properly supported. For example, in 2017, we found a client who received 2 different food allowances when only 1 should have been received. In 2018, the ministry reimbursed a client for a travel allowance without appropriate documentation. Lack of consistent compliance with ministry legislation and policies could result in the ministry paying clients incorrect amounts of social assistance. As reported in both chapters, the ministry is still working to receive and perform timely reviews of performance reports submitted by community-based organizations. We found the delays in receiving reports from CBOs caused delays in the ministry's review. For example, for the files we tested, CBOs submitted late 40% of the audited annual financial statements in 2016-17 and 17% in 2017-18. In 2018, ministry had set a target to have 90% of the reports from CBOs, both received quarterly and annually, submitted within targeted deadlines. The ministry planned to begin assessing compliance against this target in 2018-19. Due to the delay in receiving reports from CBOs, the ministry did not review 93% of the 2016-17 reports by its expected deadline, which is October 31st. It reviewed 1 report 173 days after the October 31st deadline. The timeliness of reviews improved in 2017-18, but the ministry still reviewed 60% of the CBO reports after its deadlines. Not receiving and reviewing the reports from CBOs when expected increases the risk that the ministry cannot identify issues and take timely corrective action. So, for example, adjust future funding as needed. In our 2018 report, we make 1 new recommendation. We recommend the Ministry of Social Services implement a process to appropriately identify and disclose contractual obligations in its financial records. Contractual obligation are amounts that the ministry expects to pay in the future. At March 2018, the ministry had over 100 contracts, each worth over $500,000, with third-party service providers. We found that the ministry did not identify all significant contractual amounts in its contract database. Also, the ministry did not properly disclose contractual obligations with third-party service providers worth about $299 million in its financial records as of March 31st, 2018. When management subsequently corrected its financial records, it overcorrected them by $16 million. Without having an effective process to identify the existence and amount of contractual obligations, the ministry may not have complete and accurate information on the commitment to make future decisions. Incomplete and inaccurate information on future obligations increases the risk of not estimating future funding needs appropriately. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks for the presentation on the two chapters. I'll turn it over to the Deputy Minister for a response, then we'll open it up for questions.
So yes, we previously received 3 recommendations related to improving processes for mitigating financial and information security risks, and as noted, we received 1 new recommendation. The ministry considers 2 of the 3 to be implemented, and progress is being made on the 3rd. On recommendation 4.1, the new recommendation around disclosure of contractual obligations, this recommendation has been addressed with the introduction of a policy providing guidance for reporting contractual obligations at fiscal year end. To ensure the policy is consistently followed, the ministry's financial services staff will review the document each February. On recommendation 4.2, in respect of established processes that ensure only eligible clients receive assistance, the ministry has implemented a new program and direction for income assistance. The new program is simpler, with fewer rules, duplication, and variation, supported by clear, transparent policies and business processes, and will improve accountability, performance, and reduce errors. As well, with respect to existing programs, the ministry has also implemented a performance improvement plan to specifically address the areas cited by the auditor. The ministry has seen a positive impact and improvement in these areas as a result of our actions. We will continue to work towards our multi-year goal of refining the income assistance program to make it even more user-friendly and sustainable. On recommendation 4.3, in regard to performing timely review of all performance information submitted by community-based organizations, we continue to work on the recommendation to complete timely reviews. With input from our stakeholders, we are currently reviewing our standard service agreement. This review will modernize the agreement and will help third-party service providers and the ministry while continuing to meet the needs of our clients. The ministry is also reviewing the process for managing the standard service agreement so that a sufficient level of oversight of compliance by third-party providers can be maintained within the ministry. It is expected that the entire initiative will be completed by the beginning of the 2021 fiscal year.
Thanks so much for the work on this front. I'll open it up to questions. Ms. Mowat.
Thank you, and thank you for the detail provided in the status update as well. On page 94 of Chapter 16, there's a specific number provided here by the provincial auditor that in the files that were tested in 2016, 2017, 63% of them had assistance payments that were not appropriately approved in accordance with policy. And it gives a number of examples of what that would have looked like. It talks about the fact that it was 46% in 2015, 2016. I'm just wondering if there's a continued update on this. I don't see a further update within the 17 chapter. Is that there? Yeah.
If you go to page 96, it's the 3rd paragraph under section 4.2 would be your comparable number there.
Thank you. So we are at 61% of the files in 2017, 2018 had assistance payments that were not appropriately approved. So just in terms of these numbers and what the goal is moving forward, I'm wondering if you can explain what you saw as the problem with being able to track assistance payments before, and how you see a current solution in the new program.
Good afternoon, Tracy Smith, Assistant Deputy Minister for Income Assistance Programs. So just to maybe give a little bit of context, the programs that currently exist in income assistance, primarily I'll speak to the Saskatchewan Assistance Plan and Transitional Employment Allowance. They really have been programs that have been in place for, in the case of SAP, for decades. And so with a program like that, what happens, what's happened over a period of time is that, policies get added onto those programs, benefits get added onto those programs. And when you take that over the course of decades, what you can get to is really a complex set of programs and policies to administer. And when you think about income assistance in some of those programs where you could have benefits and dollars for very specific items. It could be an item of clothing, it could be a kitchen utensil, and the way that the program was built was that every policy would require a receipt, and there would be a lot of back and forth between the clients and our staff. And so that really resulted in, again, in complex programs, many policies, many discrete payments, lots of exchange of receipts and paperwork. When we think about the work that we've done around income assistance redesign and really focusing on a program or moving towards a program that is simpler, more transparent, client-friendly, really one of the primary goals there was to move to a program that is simpler for clients to understand and for our staff to administer. And so our approach is to, rather than providing sort of discrete payments for every kind of life circumstance that a person can consider, moving to more of a flat rate approach where we provide clients with a specific dollar amount for their basic allowance and for their shelter, but we've still accounted for some of those situations that can come up in a person's life to ensure that if they need some additional dollars around health and safety, for example, or changing circumstances, there is still that ability, but there isn't, the approach is to provide the dollars to the clients, and then our staff really working with clients to understand what their needs are, what their monthly budget is, so that they're using those dollars, for what it is that they need for their particular circumstances. So I'll maybe just pause there, and I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's been, in terms of being able to track the success of the new program so far, I know we're talking about September, like a couple months here. So in terms of early indicators, I'm wondering if you've seen any changes in terms of current wait lists for clients who are maybe from time of application that are trying to access the SIS program.
Thanks for that question. So as you've noted, we are really in the early days of this new program. It is approximately 10 weeks since we've launched the new program. And so in terms of just sort of monitoring and measuring, that's absolutely, what we're going to be doing. But because we're so early in, our primary focus has been on getting information about the new program out to clients. We've been meeting with community-based organizations and, again, providing clarity around the new program, ensuring that our staff have the information they need to be able to work with and interact with those clients. So it really is early days. Absolutely, as we go forward, we're going to be carefully monitoring, evaluating a number of different areas around this. And you'll expect to, when we come back, we'll absolutely be able to have some further information because we will be farther along.
Thank you. In terms of tracking that percentage number that the auditor had provided before, so the number of assistance payments that were not appropriately approved in accordance with policy. I can't really shorten that. In terms of tracking that, is that something that's going to be done at the ministry level as well, or is that something that sort of you will await follow-up? I don't know if there's a scheduled audit. Maybe the auditor can weigh in.
Most definitely, we can weigh in. So what we'll end up with is, because we have a program redesign, it probably will be an apple-orange comparison. So what we'll be doing, though, is we'll be looking at the requirements of the new program. As management has described, we anticipate there'll be a lot less for us to audit into some degree, and that there won't be as many conditions, in terms of that paperwork going back and forth. So what we're anticipating is that, given the program redesign, that it should drop dramatically, hopefully to next to zero. But it will be an apple-orange comparison, so we probably won't reflect it in a comparator in the same manner that we've done here, because it wouldn't be fair, because we'd be comparing one type of a program to another one.
Okay. And I guess the other question is that something that you're keeping an eye on within the ministry as well?
Absolutely, as far as any over underpayments, areas where we need to go back and review policy or staff training, definitely.
Thank you. In terms of, you mentioned the program being client friendly. In terms of client access, I'm wondering if you've heard of any concerns. Certainly, I've had some concerns come into my constituency office around the direct payment going to clients, needing to have a bank account to have the payments deposited into, some of the other challenges around not having a letter of guarantee, utilities being bundled within the cost of living allowance. Are these concerns that the ministry has heard as well?
I would say, yes, we have heard some similar concerns from clients and from stakeholders, and so that is a part of the work that is keeping us very busy, is hearing about that, communicating the change to all, problem solving where we see there's an option for different ways of responding to things like direct payment. In direct deposit. That has been a big part of our work and training coming up to this change with our staff around how they will interact with our clients to assist them in managing that, in being able to budget. And Tracy spoke to, being able to decide what money needs to go where and how you plan for that. So that's a big part. That motivational interviewing and working with clients is a big part of what we are doing. It takes time for people to adjust to that change. And always we have the ability and the option in the ministry and with clients who, for whatever reason, be it a mental health and addictions issue, a cognitive challenge, there is always the option to look at trusteeship if that is necessary for clients to help them with that money. Access to the program, again, we feel we have broadened that ability with our online application. That's a learning opportunity and experience for some clients. There's been a fair bit of take-up. I think about 50% we are at now of applications are coming in on the online application. And it's interesting to note that some of that is happening at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, so people are appreciating that extra accessibility, but it also comes with some learning and challenges. So I would say overall, we are hearing the same things as you. We are also hearing lots of positive things, and so we're trying to monitor those and respond as appropriate.
Thank you. On page 95 of Chapter 17, the auditor is talking about 100 contracts as of March 2018 that were each worth over $500,000 with third-party service providers, and says that the ministry expected to pay over $473 million to these third-party service providers over the next 3 years. Can you speak to what type of services these contracts are for?
So those numbers refer to all of our third-party contracts within the ministry, so they would cover the range of child and family services, income assistance supports, and disability programs. So they could be things from We referenced the adoption center in Child and Family. That would be one of those contracts. Contracts with trusteeships that I just mentioned in income assistance, the contracts for the supported living homes we were talking about in disability programs. So it's that entire range.
Thank you. How do these contracts compare to, say, a few years ago? Is it a comparable number, or is it fewer or more?
I would say some of that, so we have more contracts than we did, say, 5 years ago. And some of that is driven, of course, by the change from Valley View Residential Center to the homes we were speaking of. So that meant more contracts. Also, increases in child and family programs means more contracts with support services as well.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thanks so much. Mr. McMorris?
One regarding the CBOs and just one question that, and the late reporting, and then of course that puts delays you being able to review them, and what they've had to say. I mean, after talking to a number of CBOs that I have dealt with, whether it's in the constituency or wherever, they just tend not to have the capacity to get all that work done in time. Is there anything that can be done to help them in that? I know it's a commitment that they've signed as far as the agreements to make sure that they timely report, but it's capacity more than anything else. It's not that they're trying to hold back information, it's capacity, and what can be done to help them on that front.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the question. And absolutely, we recognize it as a capacity issue versus an unwillingness issue. So some of the things that the ministry is doing, I mentioned our review of our standard contract, and that has been being done very much in collaboration with our partners. We actually did a survey out to get information back from them on what are the difficult parts of the contract, what would make it easier, how can we be more efficient in that work. So we're hoping that will be helpful. I had also mentioned in regard to the disability programs earlier, that we've put some additional positions within the ministry to help CBOs with their compliance and their reporting requirements. So always looking for those opportunities, recognizing that their resources are stretched.
Okay, I'm good. Good, Trent.
Thanks for the good question as well. At this point, we have the two chapters. The first chapter have all outstanding recommendations. And so we will I would welcome a motion to conclude considerations. Mr. O'Lawson moves. All in favor? That's carried. In Chapter 17, there's a new recommendation which has been implemented as expressed here today and on the status update. So I'd welcome a motion that we concur in. Mr. O'Lawson moves that we concur and note compliance. All in favor? It's agreed. And with that, we will move along to chapter, we're just doing 31 on its own. And I'd also like to welcome, I see Mr. Todd Gowdy, former member of the committee, now provincial secretary, for popping in here and joining us here today. It's good to see Todd. If we didn't have so much on our agenda, we'd ask you for a presentation, but we'll keep moving along here, and we'll pass it over to the auditor's office to address Chapter 31.
So Chapter 31 of our 2018 report, Volume 1, on pages 299 to 301, reports the results of our first follow-up of the recommendations we originally made in our 2015 audit regarding minimizing employee absenteeism. We made 4 recommendations in the 2015 audit. Since our 2015 audit, and by February 2019, the ministry had expanded its attendance management training, hired a disability management consultant, and is piloting a new program, Be at Work, which was under development by the Public Service Commission. In 2016-17, the ministry's average sick leave usage per full-time equivalent was 10.19 days, about 0.2 days lower than the prior year. Social services still needed to encourage supervisors to take available attendance management training and monitor participation. As of February 2018, the ministry was piloting some new attendance managing training initiatives, mental health first aid training, Not Myself Today program, and Be at Work program. We found the ministry did not have a process to monitor who had not taken the training, nor did it require supervisors to refresh attendance management training on a periodic basis. Provide supervisors with quarterly reports that identify employees with higher than average sick leave to determine the causes for such absences and develop targeted attendance managed strategies to address those causes. We found the supervisors did not receive periodic reports about absenteeism from 2015 to 2017. Receiving timely and usable information on employees with higher than average sick leave allows supervisors to identify and take timely action to reduce future absences. Provide periodic reports on the effectiveness of its attendance management strategies to senior management. We found that senior management did not receive sufficient reporting on strategies undertaken. Receiving progress reports on attendance management strategies helps senior management understand the cause for employee absenteeism and whether the ministry's actions are effectively reducing absenteeism. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks for the presentation and the focus. I'll flip it over to the DM, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. So social services received the 4 recommendations. We've started work on all of them and anticipate full implementation by March of 2020. On recommendation 3.1, in relation to encouraging supervisors to take available attendance management training and to monitor participation, the ministry's disability management consultant supports supervisors and managers in managing attendance. Executive management is provided with reminders related to mandatory training for staff, along with quarterly sick leave data for each branch. The ministry's Health, Safety, and Emergency Management Unit currently delivers in-office information sessions that include reminders to supervisors and managers about the mandatory online attendance management training tool. Recommendation 3.2, in regards to supervisors receiving quarterly reports, Social Services Disability Management Consultant provides sick leave reports to branch heads that show sick leave usage for all of their staff. Managers are expected to focus on individuals with more than 8 days sick leave per fiscal year. Additional actions planned to complete this work include more emphasis to increase awareness of quarterly sick leave utilization reports for senior managers to cascade to supervisors, who are then expected to follow up with their staff. And the analysis of the ministry's sick leave will include descriptions for areas of high utilization. Recommendation 3.2, in regards to working with the Public Service Division to develop targeted strategies. The ministry has started gathering and analyzing sick leave and absentee data with the help of the PSC. This work can be completed over this fall and winter. Once data gathering and analysis are complete, the ministry will create targeted strategies to address above average sick leave usage. Strategies will be rolled out to divisions for use going into our next fiscal year. On the final recommendation, in regards to giving senior management periodic reports on the effectiveness of its attendance management strategies, information will continue to be reported to executive management through quarterly updates and will contain more detail as improvements are made to the process. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I suspect Mowat has questions. Ms. Mowat, anyone else around the table? Ms. Mowat?
Not sure how you knew. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In terms of these recommendations, I see that these have been ongoing concerns for a while. I think the first recommendations came out in a 2015 report. Can you speak to what some of the challenges are that the ministry has faced in terms of implementing these, not implementing these recommendations faster?
Thank you. A few things I think we'd like to highlight. Social services is a large organization, a lot of staff, fair amount of turnover, and a fair amount of promotion within, which is always nice as well. But it does mean a constant need to be educating and informing and reminding as you get new staff, new supervisors, new managers. So it's never something that's done as far as that education and awareness. The reports that we receive, while I would say they are somewhat automated, there is manual work that's required as well to get that information to our field. So that takes time and is labor intensive. But we are working with the PSC on that to make that easier as we can.
On page 302, the ministry's average sick leave was 10.19 days per full-time employee. Do you know how that compares to other ministries at all? Have you been given any of that information?
Thank you. I don't have the specific numbers with me. I'm sure I've seen them, but I don't have them. What I do know and will say is social services is along with some of the other large service delivery ministries in the higher areas than some. So I think the nature of the work and the direct service delivery. Yep.
Has the number of days been pretty comparable over the last 5 years or so? 20 up to 2015, 2016, but prior to that, I'm not sure what it looked like.
Yeah, so we've consistently been close to that 10-day mark, little under, little over, yeah.
Do you know how often these positions are filled when someone is away due to illness? I would assume probably not.
No, not for a day or two, unless it was a long-term leave. They're not filled, yeah.
Do you know if there's any correlation to increased caseload with increased sick times?
I do not have that information, no.
In terms of the attendance management training, can you describe what that training looks like a little bit?
Thank you. So the training is a module, a Learn module in our learning program, and it's comprised of a number of scenarios. And the objective is to help supervisors, managers be comfortable in having those conversations with staff. So how to start out on an informal conversation if you're starting to be concerned or to see something. Always, of course, this is a support conversation, so it's how to have that conversation, offer what supports might be needed, get an understanding of are there things that the employer can do to assist, are there things that the employee should and could be doing for themselves that we could support them in. So it's very much scenario based on how to have those conversations.
In terms of not getting a full uptake from managers in volunteering themselves for the training, what does the ministry attribute that to?
Thank you. So I'm told that since these results came out, we've had 170 more staff that have taken the training. That's not specifically just to our management group. So what we are doing around that management group where there's a fair bit of turnover, so it's again back to that re-educating and reinforming. We have our disability management consultant going out to each of our locations and working directly with management to inform them about the training, to encourage them to take it, to work through some of those issues with them.
And has there been any consideration given to making the training mandatory?
The training is mandatory. It's smiling. Yes.
It's everything that the auditor suggested was strongly encouraged. So I was curious about that. So I know you said you don't have data in terms of correlation between increased caseload and increased sick time, but is there what explanation does the ministry give for the fact that the average sick leave is still around 10 days per staff?
Yeah. I don't have any science to that. What I would refer back to is the nature of the work that our staff do, the high intensity of the work itself, the operational nature. Contact with people all the time.
Thank you. That concludes my questions, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Any other questions on this chapter? Not seeing any. I'll invite a motion that we conclude consideration for Chapter 31. Sure can. Yeah, Mr. Olison. Yeah, Lawson.
I was just wondering, are you still utilizing the disability management consultant at this time? Are you still?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks. For that, Chapter 31, does someone want to move that we conclude consideration? Ms. Lambert moves. All agreed? That's agreed. That's carried. And we'll move along now to Chapter 26, and we're dealing with that again individually, the rest of them individually. I'll turn it over to the auditor's office.
So in 2017-18, the ministry received about 15,000 reports of alleged child abuse and neglect. Over 6,000 of these reports resulted in investigations. Timely investigation of allegations of child abuse and neglect is critical to protect the safety of children. Chapter 26 of our 2018 report, Volume 2, on pages 191 to 205, reports the results of our audit of the Ministry of Social Services processes to investigate, within a reasonable timeframe, allegations of child abuse and neglect. It contains 5 new recommendations for the committee's consideration. We concluded for the 12-month period ended June 30th, 2018, the ministry had, other than the following, effective processes to investigate within a reasonable timeframe allegations of child abuse and neglect. I'm going to focus my presentation on the 5 recommendations we made. On page 199, we recommended the Ministry of Social Services have independent review and approval of screening decisions within 2 working days when the ministry decides not to investigate a child abuse and neglect allegation. The ministry expects supervisors to review and approve, by making a notation in an IT case management system, all screening decisions intake workers make on whether to investigate a case or not. We tested 63 reports and found that the independent reviews are not always occurring consistently or timely. For one of the 63 reports of alleged child abuse and neglect we tested, the supervisor did not review and approve the intake assessment decision. In 2 other reports we tested, the same person made and approved the intake assessment decision. And for 3 of the 63 reports we tested, where the intake assessment decision was not to investigate, the supervisor review and approval did not occur for almost 1 to 2 weeks after the intake assessment was complete. Independently reviewing intake assessments within a short time frame after their completion confirms that the ministry has made appropriate and objective decisions related to reported child abuse and neglect allegations. Not doing timely independent reviews of intake assessment increases the risk of the ministry not appropriately protecting children. On the same page, 199, we recommended that the Ministry of Social Services promptly monitor the appropriateness of changed screening decisions related to the reported child abuse and neglect allegations. The ministry allows supervisors to override the screening decisions made by staff on completed intake assessments. So change from investigate to not investigate or vice versa. In this case, the supervisor needs to provide sufficient written rationale for the override. For 2 of the 63 reports we tested with an override, the rationale for the change from the recommended action was not sufficient. In both cases, the supervisors changed the recommended action from investigating the report to not investigating, with little or no explanation. When we brought these cases to management's attention, management found the supervisor's changes were not appropriate and the report should have been investigated. In both cases, though, the ministry has had ongoing contact with the children and families since the overrides. We found the ministry staff had not independently reviewed either overrides for appropriateness. Documenting reasons for changing screening decisions helps show why they are legitimate and appropriate. Reviews help ensure the ministry makes the right decisions when it comes to investigating reports of alleged child abuse and neglect. Our third recommendation on page 201, we recommend that the Ministry of Social Services attempt to make face-to-face contact with the child and family involved in a reported child abuse and neglect allegation within required timeframes to assess the child's safety. When investigating reports of suspected child abuse and neglect, the ministry requires caseworkers to attempt first contact with the child who is the subject of the report and their family immediately or within 5 days of starting the investigation to assess whether the family is safe and whether the family needs any interventions, obviously based on risk. The ministry has set timeframes for timing of contact to keep children in these situations safe. For 2 of 15 investigations we tested, which required face-to-face contact within 5 days, ministry caseworkers did not attempt to make contact with the child and their family within the required time frame. One instance was 3 days late, and the other was 16 days late. Not making contact with the child within the prescribed timeframes increases the risk that the child remains in an unsafe environment. Our fourth recommendation is on page 202. We recommended that the Ministry of Social Services complete family risk assessments for child abuse and neglect investigations within required timeframes. The ministry requires caseworkers to complete a family risk assessment within 30 days of assignment of the investigation. The family risk assessment estimates the likelihood of a family abusing or neglecting a child in the future. So we'll say like in the next 12 to 18 months. For 3 of the 30 investigations we tested, caseworkers completed the family risk assessment late, after the required 30 days. For 1 investigation, staff completed the family risk assessment 43 days late. For the other 2 investigations, staff had not completed the family risk assessments as of June 30th, 2018, and the required 30 days had passed. One was 2 days late, and the other was already 76 days late. Another case was closed and did not have a family risk assessment at all. Delays in completing the family risk assessment results in delays in finalizing the investigations. Not having a timely completed family risk assessment may result in a family not receiving ongoing child protection services timely, when there is a high likelihood that the family may maltreat their child in the future. Our final recommendation is on page 203. We recommend that the Ministry of Social Services finalize investigations of reported, suspected child abuse and neglect within required timeframes to allow timely supervisor review. For 9 of 30 investigations we tested, caseworkers did not finalize the investigation within required timeframes, which is 45 days of initiation of the investigation. Consequently, the supervisor's review of the investigation decision was also late. So for 6 of these investigations, caseworkers appropriately documented the reasons why completion of the investigations was delayed. So extra time was needed to locate applicable parties, or there was delayed receipt of police reports. For the remaining 3 investigations, staff didn't document the reasons for the delays in the IT case management system. One of these 3 files was 43 days late. The 2 remaining investigations were not finalized at June 30th, 2018, and one was 2 days late and the other one 76 days late. Across the province at June 30th, 2018, 44% of investigations, or 521 out of 1,180, were not finalized within the ministry's required 45 days, of which 7% of those investigations were open for more than 180 days. Not finalizing investigations within required timeframes results in late supervisor's review and agreement with investigation closure decisions. This may result in delayed ongoing child protection services to children and their family in need. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks for the important presentation. I'll turn it over to the ministry, the Deputy Minister, for response.
Thank you. So of the 5 recommendations made around investigations of alleged child abuse and neglect, the ministry considers 2 to be implemented and progress being made on 3. As I go through the responses, I will point out that although the recommendations are different, the actions in response to the recommendations may be at times the same given the similarity of the issues being addressed. So on 4.3.2, in regards to promptly monitoring the appropriateness of change screening decisions, the new recommendation, we believe this recommendation is implemented. Right now, supervisors review and approve all screening decisions. Additionally, review teams across the province ensure consistent and reliable decisions are made related to reports of abuse and neglect. Recommendation 4.4.3, on the attempt to make face-to-face contact with child and family. We are also of the view that this recommendation has been implemented. Each year, the Quality Assurance Unit measures whether children involved in investigations of abuse or neglect have been interviewed. This measurement includes the priority response time for the investigation. Service area directors monitor these investigations closely, referring to quarterly roll-ups of 1-day and 5-day responses and compliance. Our policy is to identify and examine those investigations in which children were not interviewed. Additional frontline child protection resources have been introduced to ensure timely contact with children and families when there is a report of abuse or neglect. For 4.44, the completion of family risk assessments within required timeframes. Initially, we believed this recommendation was fully implemented. We are now updating our status to partially implemented. The Quality Assurance Unit annually measures whether a risk assessment was completed during the investigation and whether required timeframes were met. And as I mentioned earlier, in 1819, the ministry added, I didn't mention this earlier, sorry, but the ministry added 30 frontline child protection staff. As well, the South Service area is allocating 4 more child protection staff to investigations as a result of higher than normal volume in that area. The ministry's compliance rate for completing risk assessments is on target. However, more work will be done to ensure that those assessments are completed within required timeframes. Recommendation 4.3.1, in regards to an independent review and approval of screening decisions. We believe this recommendation to be partially implemented. Currently, supervisors are required to review and approve all screening decisions. And since April 2019, review teams across the province review intakes to ensure the consistent and reliable decisions are being made. Plans are in place again for the Quality Assurance Unit to measure whether the reports have been completed within 2 working days during 2021. The final recommendation in regard to finalized investigations of reported suspected child abuse and neglect within the timeframes, we consider this recommendation to be partially implemented. In 2018-19, the ministry again added the 30 frontline child protection staff, as well as allocating the 4 more positions to the South Service area. The Quality Assurance Unit tracks whether investigations have been completed, however, not within the expected timeframes. In 2021, again, we will do that quality assurance work of starting to measure and report on the timeframes, as well as the investigations being completed. Thank you.
Sorry, just reading. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll open up for questions. Ms. Mowat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On page 191, the auditor notes that as of 2017-2018, the ministry received about 15,300 reports of alleged child abuse and neglect. I'm wondering what this figure is for 2018, 2019, if you have that with you.
2018-19, we received 18,695 reports.
What unit is responsible for these investigations?
Thank you. So for the initial screen, when a call comes in, we have 3 screening teams across the province, one in each of the regions that does that initial screen. If the decision is made to do an investigation, in our larger centers, we have dedicated investigation teams. In our smaller and rural areas, we have a blend of activities or roles that workers take on.
Can you give us an idea of if there are designated staff toward this issue, what those teams look like?
So just for clarification, are you asking for size of staff, like number of staff, or?
Complement number of staff, but also what their designations are, if they have professional designations or, yeah.
Okay.
Whole team looks.
Thank you. So across the province, we would have 22 staff who are dedicated to that initial screening. We would have 50 staff that are the dedicated investigative workers, so that doesn't include the sort of blend in the smaller and rural locations. All of our staff are required to have a social work degree and then take the additional training that is specific to their role.
Thank you. In terms of the dedicated workers that you've cited, these are folks who are working full-time on these cases, or are they double-hatted as well?
No, the 50 that are dedicated investigators, that is their role, yep.
Thank you. And then the blended ones are assumably have multiple roles, multiple responsibilities? Okay. On page 196, it indicates that the ministry had 180 child protection caseworkers as of March 2018. Is there a number of how many there are today?
We have added, of the 30 positions that I referenced, 24 of those would be child protection workers in that area.
Sorry, and I'm looking for the total because this one was talking about 180.
Yeah, and I would ask that we would go back and determine exactly what that 180 was referring to, because it seems low to me as a number. So I need to clarify what exactly we were categorizing there.
Fair enough, thank you. On page 200, it's on figure 6. It's looking at the number of new child abuse and neglect investigations and children entering the ministry's care for the past 3 years. It shows that this number has increased quite a bit over the past few years. I'm wondering sort of what the plan is to address this the increase in this issue.
Yeah, so in 17-18, as you point out, the number of new investigations has increased. That number on the chart is 6,716. On the other hand, or along with that, the number of children entering care has actually decreased. So on the investigation side, what is driving that? Increased reports. So certainly back to the fact that we had the 18,695 reports or calls. So we are getting more reports or calls in from the public, from stakeholders, from police, from schools. And that, I mean, there can be a variety of reasons for that, of course, that we could talk about and theorize about. But what I would want to point out is the increased reports, the increased investigations, but due to, I believe, the work of the ministry and our third-party CBOs around supporting families and working with families and kinship care, slightly reducing the number of children coming into care is a significant success story.
Thank you. Would you say that improvement is linked to the increase in additional frontline child protection staff from 2018, 2019? Do you think that has played a role?
I can't scientifically correlate that. I expect it helps. I expect more so it is an increased emphasis on working with First Nations, working with communities, expanding our look for extended family, our continued work with supported living in situations where we actually bring mom and dad or mom and children in together rather than taking children into care. So it's also new ways of working, I think, that is assisting with that.
With regards to recommendation number 1 on the status update, and you noted verbally as well that the timeline for implementation is the second quarter of 2021. And I understand this is based on the quality assurance process and the ability to update that process. I'm just wondering, it seems like quite a long time frame in terms of the seriousness of the matter, in terms of being able to implement. I think this is talking about a second set of eyes on the allegations. Is there sort of a workaround process that's being completed until that formal process gets brought into place, or what is there's no way to expedite the process, I guess, is the question.
So I think the reason we reported that one is partially implemented is because we have already put the processes in place with staff doing the investigations to ensure that, to drive that compliance. The 2021 is the quality assurance unit taking that full year of data and saying, where are we on that 2 days? Okay.
All right, that's very reassuring. Thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
No, good questions. Any other questions from members with respect to Chapter 26, Mr. McMorris?
just have a couple questions. I think that 18,000 incidents jumps just is astonishing to me, and maybe I'm very naive. I think I am, but you kind of mentioned where a lot of those reports would come in from. You said, police, could be school division. Can you just give me a little background? Is it often not relatives, neighbors, family members too as well? Can you just give me a little kind of?
I don't have any sort of breakdown, but absolutely, it could be family members, neighbors, friends. Yes, it's.
Would it be safe to say that at times there would be multiple reports on one incident?
Yes.
Or do you think that's 18,000 separate incidents? I know that's a really tough number to break down, but.
Yeah, so the 18,695 would be distinct calls. That does not mean it's distinct children or families. Yes.
So we would hope that, it's still tough to break that number down from 18,000, but 50 a day is what that works out to over 165 days. That's pretty astounding. And just to kind of a chapter before, when we're talking about absenteeism, the workload and the stress that your workers are under is just incredible. So not that that is any excuse and any help that we can give them, but that's tough work.
All really good questions. There's heavy stuff we're dealing with here today, and the numbers are sort of mind-blowing, and some pretty harsh realities that are lived out there. And thank you to those that are, engaged in this work on behalf of the people of the province. And so thank you for that work and seeing these recommendations through certainly the response times and the checks and balances. And what we've seen, I think, a real quick response from social services in response to this joint work. I just would want to say thank you and to continue on that good path. Not seeing any other questions at this point. I think we have, I believe, first, the fourth recommendation initially was identified as being implemented, but I heard from the Deputy Minister that you'd prefer to walk that back to sort of a partial implementation. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so then I'd welcome a motion for recommendations 1, 4, and 5 that we concur and note progress. Mr. Weeks, that we concur and note progress with 1, 4, 5, and all in favor? That's carried. That leaves recommendations 2 and 3, which I would welcome a motion that we concur and note compliance. Mr. Fayaz, all agreed? All right, that's carried as well. Just recognizing the clock, we just have a little bit more work to do. We're not sure how much time that'll take, but I've had a couple requests for a very brief recess, if we can call it 5 minutes. Feel free to get water or whatever you need to do, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. And we'll move our attention along to Chapter 46, and I'll turn it over to the provincial auditor in her office.
Chapter 46 of our 2018 report, Volume 2, starting on page 303, reports the results of our second follow-up of 5 recommendations we previously made about the actions of the Ministry of Social Services to improve its processes to protect children in care. By August 2018, the ministry had fully implemented 4 of 5 recommendations and partially implemented the remaining recommendation. Key improvements included adequately monitoring compliance with the ministry's child protection standards. The ministry has detailed rules and procedures, also known as their standards, that caseworkers are to follow to protect children in care. The ministry's Quality Assurance Unit conducts annual quality assurance reviews to monitor the compliance of First Nations agencies and its own service areas to monitor compliance with its standards. For each review, a findings report is prepared. The ministry actively monitors compliance rates and took steps to improve compliance with specific standards when they were lower than expected. Also, the ministry has signed agreements with First Nations Child and Family Services agencies requiring timely and relevant information to ensure proper care of children who are wards of the minister. But by August 2018, the ministry has still not received from First Nations agencies timely or complete information about how many children are the minister's responsibility, who they are, and where they live. We found the ministry did not check the completeness of information submitted or follow up with staff on missing reports or information. Without the receipt of timely and complete information from the First Nations agency, the ministry increases the risk of not having sufficient information to enable it to monitor the care of children receiving child protection services from First Nations agencies. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks for the presentation. I'll turn it over to the DM, and we'll go from there.
5 recommendations, 4 which the auditor considers implemented. The ministry considers the 5th recommendation implemented as well. I'll speak to that one. So that is 3.4, that the ministry implement a system to know how many children are in the minister's responsibility, who they are, and where they live. All First Nations Child and Family Services agencies are required to provide monthly reports regarding children in care receiving services through their First Nations Child and Family Services agencies. The ministry's First Nations and Métis Service Unit tracks whether First Nations agencies are submitting reports throughout the year. The unit has a process in place to follow up if information is late or missing. The ministry is also able to contact agencies for information on any given day to obtain information about specific children in their care. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open it up for questions. Ms. Moen.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can get an update on the number of children in out-of-home care. On page 303, it shows that as of March 31st, 2018, the ministry reported it had 5,257 children in out-of-home care. And do you have the current numbers?
We break it down in so many different ways. We're just trying to find the right answer here. So our most recent number of children in out-of-home care in the ministry's care is 5,014.
And do you have the percentage of, so it says, of those children who are wards of the ministry staff, caseworkers cared for 94.3% of the children, and First Nations agencies cared for 5.7% of the children. I'm wondering if the percentage of care provided by the First Nations agencies has increased as we've seen new agreements come into place.
I don't have the answer to your specific question, but just to clarify, the number I gave you, the 5,014, that's children in the out-of-home care in the care of the ministry. As of March 31st, 2018, there were 1,059 children in care of First Nations Child and Family Services, which was down 2% from the previous year. But to your question about the percentage breakdown between ministry and First Nations agencies, I don't have that today.
That's okay. Thank you for providing what you have. In terms of, I know the federal landscape stands to impact us provincially quite a bit. And in terms of the possibility of Bill C-92 passing, I wonder if you can speak to any sort of preparatory work or thoughts that have went into what changes would have to be required at the ministry as far as that goes.
So definitely, it's our understanding that Bill C-92 will come into effect in January of 2020. Having significant conversations with federal counterparts, with Indigenous partners, with other ministries like Justice. So we're definitely taking a look at that. There's a lot for us of unknowns about how we will need to respond or how our programs and processes and legislations will need to change. So we need a fair bit more clarity around what Bill C-92 is and what's in there to be able to respond. But I'm definitely having the conversations.
Thank you. That concludes my questions, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions with respect to Chapter 46? Not seeing any. I'd welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 46. Moved by Ms. Lambert. All agreed? That's carried. We'll turn our attention to Chapter 47.
The ministry uses an electronic case management system called Lincoln to support the delivery of its programs and services for children in care. Lincoln contains confidential information about children in care and their families. Accurate and secure information in Lincoln helps ensure children who are in the care of the minister are properly protected and cared for. Chapter 47 of our 2018 report, Volume 2, on pages 309 to 312, reports the results of our first follow-up of recommendations we originally made in our 2016 audit on the actions of the Ministry of Social Services to protect information about children in care in the Lincoln system. By August 2018, the ministry had fully implemented 3 of 4 recommendations and partially implemented the remaining recommendation. Key improvements included removing user access to Lincoln within required timeframes, verifying care provider information entered into Lincoln, consistently reviewing and approving Lincoln payment reports to identify unusual payments. The ministry still needed to upgrade the Lincoln system and develop a long-term plan for keeping Lincoln up to date. Routinely upgrading and patching is key to address the security exposure of sensitive and business-critical systems like Lincoln. Timely security patches, so annual or more frequent, provide protection against known vulnerabilities. Without updating systems in a timely manner, the ministry increases the risk of compromise and failure. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks for the presentation. I'll turn it over to the DM.
The one remaining recommendation, partially implemented, 3.1, in regards to the establishing a written plan for updates to Lincoln. Updates to the most recent Lincoln version have been made. Next steps are to define and implement the Lincoln upgrade policy that ensures the system is upgraded on a regular basis. This plan is to include a review of available Lincoln patches, and we anticipate this recommendation to be fully implemented by spring of 2020.
Okay. I'll open up for questions. Ms. Mowat?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering about, the upgrade to Lincoln. On page 310 of chapter 47, the auditor noted that the upgrade was expected to cost the ministry over $2 million, and that was expected to happen by March 2019. This upgrade that's being discussed in the chapter is the same as the upgrade that you mentioned as your actions that have been taken. Is that correct?
Correct, and it was completed in May of this year.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the requirement to establish a written plan for updating the system, I'm just curious about what the expectation is. Maybe the provincial auditor can weigh in, but I don't know what sort of plan is expected from the ministry, so I just wanted to shed some light on that if possible.
Just from our side, with any IT system, it's a matter of you implement it, and then it's about having a life cycle plan to figure out how are you going to maintain, how are you going to keep that system over the course of your expected sort of useful life properly secured and maintained, so you'll get sort of the best value that anticipate till sort of that end of life cycle. So we were really just looking for more or less that outlined and trying to make sure that there, as known vulnerabilities come to sight, that they are securing it appropriately.
And the only thing that I would add is that in the government, like when there's more than one organization involved, it's really clear to have a clear understanding as who's going to pay, like whose budget is coming out of too.
That's what I was going to say. It seems clear to me that updates would happen as they were available, and I didn't know why that there was a requirement for it to be in a written plan. But based on the fact that we're talking about this update costing $2 million, it makes sense that it would sort of need to be built into the structure of the budgeting process and the whole the overall ministry's plan. So thank you for providing that clarity. I guess in terms of the development of a long-term plan, I understand that it's under development. What does the ministry see as any obstacles that would stand in its way for completing this?
So we have the draft policy, which will apply not only to Lincoln, but to all of our database systems around review and renewal. And then for each of those systems, we will need to have a roadmap, a 5-year plan around what upgrades will be required, what new functions we think might need to come into that. And then it really just is, as you say, a matter of informing decision makers of that, building it into our budget, making sure that we're doing the timely upgrades for security and performance.
Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? Chapter 47, I'd welcome a motion to conclude consideration of 47. Moved by Mr. Olausen. All agreed? Agreed. That's carried. I think at this point, I'm not sure, is everyone going to stick around for these? No. So then I just want to say on behalf of the committee, a great big thank you to everyone that's here today and all the work that's gone into responding to these recommendations, implementing the recommendations, and of course, your time here with us and all those others that might be strewn across the province in various roles that connect to this work and all the stakeholders. So thank you so very much to those that are here today, those that have also been involved in the work. Would the Deputy Minister care to provide a final remark, or are you sticking around for the Saskatchewan?
Stay.
Sure, so you and Renelle, and great. So thank you very much. very quick recess just to shift the table. We'll stay in our seats and we'll be ready for the Sask housing. Thank you. The rest can move, yeah. All right. We'll keep rolling along here, and we'll move our attention to the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation. Would you care to briefly introduce these officials? I think they've maybe been introduced already before. They're at the front table now.
But I can remind people since we've lost most of the team. So ADM and President and CEO for Housing, Raynell Wilson, Diane Bard, Executive Director from our Housing Division, and Ray Arscott has stayed with us from our finance budgeting area, and Natasha, my EA, is hanging in there. So.
Good work, Natasha and crew. Thanks for being here. I'll table PAC 9228, Saskatchewan Housing Corporation status update dated September 26, 2019. Thanks for the work on that. And I'll turn it over to the Auditor's Office to address Chapter 27.
Chapter 27 of our 2017 report, Volume 2, on pages 207 to 218, reports the results of our audit of the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation's processes to provide adequate social housing to eligible clients. We concluded for the period August 1st, 2016 to July 31st, 2017, the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation had, other than our 4 recommendations, effective processes to provide adequate social housing to eligible clients. Sask Housing Social Housing Program provides subsidized rental housing through over 18,000 subsidized rental units in over 300 communities across the province. The program is intended to serve low-income households. It gives priority to seniors or people 60 years of age and older, families with children or dependents, and people with disabilities. In Saskatchewan, 260 local housing authorities locally manage and administer Sask Housing's housing programs and units. These authorities are agency of Sask Housing with their own government-appointed boards of directors. Sask Housing funds them. In our first and second recommendation on page 212, we recommend that the Sask Housing Corporation have its housing authorities follow its policies to calculate point scores prior to placing applicants in suitable social housing. We also recommend that the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation maintain accurate and complete point score data for social housing in its provincial database. Authorities are to use point scores to prioritize placements for applicants. So, for example, placing the highest score applicants in the first suitable and available unit. Housing authorities are not always applying the point score process consistently and entering the correct score into the Sask Housing's provincial database. Staff did not always update the scores previously entered into the provincial database based on additional information gathered through home visits or interviews. So as a result, we found the scores in Excel spreadsheets in the provincial database differed. In one location, management stated that the decision as to who to offer a unit to did not rely solely on the point score. Instead, the local board reviewed the applications, discussed the applicants, and selected the priority applicant, but didn't keep the decision documentation. Not following Sask Housing's process to place applicants using point scores may result in biased decision-making and the applicant with the highest need not being placed in social housing on a priority basis. Also, not consistently calculating point scores and entering them into the database correctly results in inaccurate information in the provincial database. In our fourth recommendation on page 213, we recommend that the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation require housing authorities to retain documentation to verify applicants are offered social housing units based on their point score priority. We found the housing authorities do not keep all the documentation to support the decisions made about applicants to the social housing program. For example, the authorities do not retain the listing of all applicants and their point scores at the time of an individual's placement. Therefore, authorities could not show that they always assigned the highest priority applicant to a suitable available unit. Without retaining all documentation to support decisions, neither the housing authorities nor Sask Housing can verify the appropriateness of a placement in a social housing unit, such as in an appeal. In our third recommendation on page 213, we recommend that the Saskatchewan Housing Authority set timelines to assess applications for social housing and notify applicants of decisions regarding program eligibility. Sask Housing has not set time limits for when housing authority staff inform applicants of the results of assessments of the social housing program applications, so whether they were rejected or approved. We found for the applications tested, authorities took between 1 day and 5 months to complete the assessment of the application. We also found 20% of the files tested. The authorities did not document whether its staff informed an applicant that they were accepted into the program. So not setting timelines for completing assessments and informing the applicant of the results increases the risk that the applicants may be living in housing that does not meet their needs for longer than necessary. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks for the presentation and the focus of the work. I'll turn it over to the DM.
Thank you. So the 4 recommendations discussed today are all new, and the ministry considers them all to be implemented. 4.21, to have housing authorities follow its policies to calculate point scores. In January 2018, Saskatchewan Housing Corporation reaffirmed with housing authorities that they needed to calculate point scores before placing applicants in social housing. Additionally, they were advised that documents referring to offering and placing approved social housing applicants needed to be retained. These documents need to include reasons why units were allocated to one tenant over another with the same score. In early 2018, policies related to prioritizing and notification to applicants were reviewed for clarity. In the same year, operational reviews were enhanced to include additional review of processes and policy compliance related to prioritization, placement, and communication with applicants. On recommendation 4.22, to maintain accurate and complete point score data, housing authorities were directed to ensure applicants' point scores in paper files were consistent with those in the provincial database. Here as well, operational reviews were enhanced to include additional reviews of processes and policy compliance. Recommendation 433, to set timelines to assess applications for social housing and notify applicants. Policy was provided to housing authorities directing that all social housing applicants are to be assessed for eligibility within 90 days of receipt. And within this time frame, applicants are to be notified if they qualify or why their application was not accepted. On the final recommendation in regards to retaining documentation to verifying applicants are offered social housing, housing authorities were advised that they must retain records to document offering and placing approved applicants, including reasons why units were given to one tenant over another with the same score. Thank you.
Thanks for detailing the actions that have been taken. I'll open it up for questions. Ms. Mowat?
Thank you, and we're getting late in the day, but I have a few more questions still. In terms of, so I'm looking at page 208 here. In terms of the social housing program, at the time of the report, there were 18,000 subsidized rental units over 300 communities. I'm wondering if you can provide the current number of units that are available. That exist, I should say.
That number is currently 18,032.
Thank you. And do we know what the current vacancy rates are as well?
15.9%.
15.9. Have we seen any change in those vacancy rates over the past 5 years? What have they looked like?
The numbers I have with me today show an increase. So 2014, 10.1%, 2015, 11.5%, 2016, 13.4%.
Thank you. On page 216, about the third paragraph in, it says in 2016, Sask Housing completed an analysis of communities that were experiencing long-term vacancies. Sask Housing identified 34 communities with a population of less than 300 where there are chronic vacancies of over 30%. Sask Housing developed options for addressing these vacancies. Management presented these options to the board and decided to sell certain housing units. Can you provide an update on how many units were sold and what the total revenue was?
Okay, sorry. So what I have to date, and if it doesn't answer the full question, we can certainly follow up, but so since August of 2017, we identified 291 units in 72 southern Saskatchewan communities, there's a two-part answer here, as surplus. 143 of those have been sold as of July 31st. 31 more units are listed for sale. In 7 northern communities in that same time frame, 18 units were identified as surplus, 6 units have been sold, and 5 units are listed for sale. What I don't have at this point is the revenue for you.
Thank you. Would appreciate if you could follow up with the committee on the revenues, but the rest of that answers my question. Thank you. In terms of the first recommendation, I'm wondering what the challenge was with the inconsistent point score calculations. I see that you've reiterated the policy to let folks know that that's the expectation, that there needs to be a point score and assigned. I'm just wondering what you think the challenge was in the inconsistencies that were noted by the provincial auditor.
So what I'm being told is that one of the challenges is that information that would feed into that score comes in over time at different stages. So the housing authorities have partial information that is going into their database, get additional information that they need to make sure that that's all being reflected so that it equals the number they actually made their decision based on.
In terms of recommendation number 3, I see that a timeline has been set for 90 days. And so I'm wondering if there's indication that this policy is being followed.
We do not have data on compliance rates yet, but the operational review that we will be undertaking will provide us with that information.
Thank you. That concludes my questions, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Mr. Olawson?
Thank you. How many different housing authorities do you deal with across the province?
160.
That many? Oh my. And so all of them now are in compliance with your policies on reporting and entering into the database and that kind of thing?
They all have the policy, and we're going to be assessing that. We would hope so.
Fair enough. I didn't realize that there was that many. Okay, thank you.
A question, maybe it was touched on already, and this information's probably quite readily available in the public domain. But as far as the units that have been sold, are you able to provide back to us, I guess, the units that have been sold, but also the units that are for sale right now, the respective, if you could supply to the committee the communities and what unit that was? So I guess some are still for sale. And then my other question is, has the decision been made to sell other units that just haven't been listed yet?
Yeah, my response to that would be, yes, we were continually reassessing what would be considered surplus, what are opportunities, what other purposes. So I think the numbers that we put forward that are for sale or have sold is not an end number. Yeah.
Right, okay, so if we could just have supplied back to the committee the ones that have been sold, and then I think there was a question around dollar value maybe, so that could attach to the community and the unit. The ones that are listed, obviously, there won't be a dollar value other than whatever it's listed for. And then can you also supply, unless you're able to at the table here today, the units and respective communities that the decision's been made that will be sold?
We will provide that back to you. I would just, for clarification, on the units sold, is there a time frame? How far back would you like us to go with that?
I see this goes back maybe to, at least the auditor's work suggests a decision point around, or a program from June 2017. So I'm satisfied to go back to that point. Would there be value in going back? Was there a program of, I know there was a program in some of the larger communities that were selling units. Would it be valuable to go back further? I don't want to send you on a wild goose chase either as far as.
I think June 17th is a relevant date. That would correspond with the most recent look we've taken at what's surplus and where it is. So that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. There are 4 new recommendations, and I think they've all been implemented as what's been identified here. So I'd welcome a motion to concur and note compliance with recommendations 1 through 4. Ms. Lambert's putting that on the table. All in favor? That's carried. And then we'll move along to chapter 43.
Chapter 43 of our 2017 report, Volume 2, on pages 291 to 294, reports the results of our second follow-up of recommendations originally made in our 2012 audit of Saskatchewan Housing Corporation's processes to maintain the 18,300 housing units it owns. We made 4 recommendations. By May 2017, Sask Housing had implemented 2 of the 4 recommendations and had work to do on the remaining 2. Sask Housing uses an asset management IT system to track key information about each housing unit and component it owns. Sask Housing keeps this information current, updating the condition of units and components annually. Sask Housing prioritizes its maintenance activities for the upcoming year based on units or components that have exceeded their lifespan or are in poor condition. In May 2017, Sask Housing still needed to develop a medium or long-term corporate maintenance plan that aligns with its objective of maintaining all units at a fair condition rating level. At July 2017, the units in Sask Housing's portfolio on an overall basis were in poor condition. In addition, reporting to senior management did not include sufficient information about delayed or incomplete maintenance on housing units, or a summary of the inspections completed yearly. Not doing the right maintenance activity at the right time increases the extent of cost and of future maintenance. In addition, it increases the risk of units not being safe or secure for tenants. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. I'll turn it over to the DM.
The provincial auditor noted that 2 of the 4 recommendations that were implemented, 1 partially and the other not implemented. Of the 2 recommendations the audit did not report as implemented, we consider 1 to be implemented and the second to be partially implemented. On recommendation 3.1, develop a corporate maintenance plan for the medium to long-term time frame. The ministry considers this partially implemented. Sask Housing Corporation has engaged a consultant to undertake an assessment of the current and a 10-year projection of provincial housing needs. The report was finalized in late spring of 2019. The needs assessment will be used to determine housing requirements to meet current, midterm, and long-term need. Saskatchewan Housing Corporation will then examine its portfolio and prioritize properties based on short, medium, and long-term need, and then will develop a medium and long-term maintenance plan for these properties. This information will be incorporated into the capital asset planning tool. It is anticipated these activities will be completed by April 2020, so as such, we consider this partially implemented. On recommendation 3.4, in regard to regularly give senior management and board appropriate written reports, we consider this implemented. Each year, senior management receives a summary of approved maintenance work to be undertaken in the upcoming budget year and within 3 months of year end. They also receive a summary of maintenance work completed the previous year. The board receives an annual update on planned versus completed maintenance work for the previous year. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Open it up for questions. Ms. Mowat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the long-term maintenance plan that's needed, I think it's safe to say I was a little bit alarmed when I was reading through this chapter of the auditor's report, particularly as it refers to the facility condition index. So it says on page 292, at July 17th, 2017, the overall facility condition index, or FCI, for Sask Housing's portfolio of housing units it owns was in poor condition with an index value of 12.1%. Sask Housing indicated it aims to maintain housing units it owns at the industry standard FCI of 10%, meaning overall its units would be in fair condition. And it shows the facility condition index on the next page of what those ratings look like and what those numbers look like. We estimate that if Sask Housing continues maintenance activities at its 2016 level, the overall FCI for its portfolio of housing units will near the critical condition. So that's over 30% FCI in about 10 years, which is 2027. So that's about 8 years from now. In terms of, I see that the work that's being done in terms of developing a long-term plan, but in terms of what's being done in the meantime, I'm wondering if Sask Housing has started stepping up its maintenance in the meantime to make sure that we don't get to that level, or if not, if there's plans to sell off other housing to make sure that the FCI remains at a more stable level.
Thank you. So Saskatchewan Housing Corporation, first of all, I will say that our portfolio was largely built in the late 70s and early 80s. So it is not financially or fiscally possible to replace everything at one time, obviously. So what we do and are trying to do is prioritize the replacement of building components that are critical to the continued operation of the building or will help reduce operating costs overall, such as roofs, windows, doors, mechanical equipment. Whereas other items that are still important, such as flooring and cabinets, are assessed on a unit-by-unit basis, and typically improvements are made on those types of areas when units are turned over to new tenants. And the tool we use does show that the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation has done a good job of keeping up with the critical and health and safety building components, but is behind on those interior upgrades. If you'd like, the dollar amounts spent on maintenance over the last number of years. So 2016, $42.6 million, 2017, $74.9 million, and 2018, $49.2 million.
Do you know what the current FCI is as well?
The current province-wide FCI is 13.3.
I have no further questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions from those around the table? If not, we'll conclude. Sorry, Mr. McMorris.
I don't really understand a lot of how that works. but the rent, how that's determined. But is there any damage deposit? I would think that these houses are often transient that in nature at times, and wondering about, how they're left. I mean, the conditions can deteriorate quite quickly depending on who's in them and how they're left. It isn't not necessarily a function of the age of the building, but the wear and tear on the building. And is any of that taken into consideration?
Definitely a consideration. There is a damage deposit of $326 per unit.
Compared to private sector would be pretty small, I would think. Okay, thanks.
Not seeing any other questions, I'd welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 43. Mr. Fayaz, all agreed? That's carried. So at this time, thank you so very much to our Deputy Minister and to the representatives of the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation, CEO and President Renell Wilson. Everyone else that's involved in this work today, thank you very much for being here. Would you care to have any quick final remarks?
Thank you. Just, Minister Chair, just to thank you and the committee for the thoughtful questions posed today. Thank the provincial auditor and her team again. And also just to acknowledge, as you have, Mr. Chair, the efforts of the team that was here with me today and the 1,800 plus employees that we have in social services doing the good work every day. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of them. And thank you to the auditor's office. We've had 2 full days, and to committee members, 2 full days of committee. So thank you to the team at the audit office and our provincial auditor for all that work. We're going to take a very brief recess, and committee members will have then we're going to consider our report to submit to the Assembly. Okay, members, we'll reconvene and consider our final item, and that would be our third report of the 28th legislature. And I believe at this time we have a motion by Ms. Lambert has a motion.
That, yes, I would like to move that the draft third report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts be adopted, and further, that the final report be approved by the steering committee and filed with the clerk pursuant to Rule 136, sub 6.
Ms. Lambert has moved that the draft third report of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts be adopted, and further that the final report be approved by the steering committee and filed with the clerk pursuant to Rule 136.6. Is that agreed? Agreed. That's carried. Okay. With that concludes our work. I would welcome a motion of adjournment. Mr. Weeks moves. All agreed? This committee stands adjourned until the call of the chair.